I was going to talk today about teachers, and this morning's a perfect object lesson as to why. I'm sitting here with very sophisticated computer, cameras, microphones. I'm getting readings of my frame per second, kilobytes and audio, and I don't know what to do with any of it. I can barely manage it. And this is after having used computers since the 1980s. So obviously a teacher would be a good idea. So when you want to learn something practical and concrete, you may not care too much about the personality of the teacher or how ethical they are or anything else. You just want something, and you're studying cooking, you're studying music, you're studying whatever. But the question of a spiritual teacher or somebody to help you with spiritual questions is a little more complex. So I just want to talk about it a little bit because I've seen a lot of people go off the rails. I've seen a lot of communities go off the rails. First and foremost, it helps to have an idea of what it is that you want. Some people want to stop suffering. Some people want a life of unending bliss and joy. Some people want to learn how to get out of their own way, not badger themselves with second guessing and shoulda, woulda, coulda kind of concerns. Some people have read about or seen various esoteric religions, and they have all sorts of ideas about them, and so they want to learn that. But what is it that they want to learn? So the first thing is that what it is that you want to learn, your body already knows. You don't know. It's universal human attribute, which is clouded by the way that our minds work. Suzuki Roshi used to say, you're perfect just the way you are, and you could use a little work. The very innate quality of mind, of awareness, is unsullied, wide open, as generous as the sky. It admits everything. It admits what you like, it admits what you don't like, it admits everything. But then the mind itself is very tricky, and as soon as it's in there, we begin comparing it to other things that we've known or experienced. We decide if we like it, don't like it, or are neutral. And as soon as we start doing that, we lose the actual flavor and taste of a unique event. Every tree is different. If you have a category in your mind about tree, trunk, branches, leaves, and you may even break it down into species, Monterey cypress, maple, Japanese maple. At a certain point, there's an efficiency that takes over. But the cost of that efficiency is losing what's actually in front of you. So that if we're not careful, life becomes something like moving through a very, very complicated museum. Lots and lots of displays, lots of things to see, but at a certain point it will become known. And that's the double-edged gift and penalty of language. That a word offers us efficiency. It offers us a simple way to communicate basic level truths. But it has a cost. And the cost is, first of all, we tend to reify it as a thing, make of it an object, make of it a solid thing. We do this with the idea of the self. We have a word for it. Must be referring to something. Where is it? What's it look like? What color? What shape? Where is it located? It actually doesn't exist. It's an awareness. We have an ego, we have a sense of an individuated self, which is convenient. We never want to lose that. helps us brush our teeth and not walk in front of buses and things like that. But it should be something that we can slip when we want to. It's supposed to be an assistant. It's not supposed to be a guard or a warden. So most spiritual practice, when you really get down to it, is this business of learning how to drop below your personality or step alongside your personality so that you're not filtering reality through your personality, what you like and what you don't like, because that's always going to be less than all of it. And all of it is indescribable. And that's why at a certain point, it kind of helps to stop using language, to go toward direct experience. But it takes practice because the mind is tricky and it throws up obstacles, it throws up delusions, it throws up ideas, concepts, preferences. And we learn to perceive through language before we were old enough to discriminate that every single person that spoke to us as an infant was actually describing reality. Cute, puffy little cheeks. Oh, what a lovely baby. Oh, come to mommy, come to daddy. Here's your toy. We don't think of it. But if you have nothing to compare to, little by little by little, you begin to accept this description of reality and then forget that it's a description. The cost of that is that it takes you out of the moment and it puts you into a stream in which everything has been seen before in some way or another. So what most spiritual practice is about is stepping aside from that, learning how to step outside the ego, how to relax it to the point that maybe it gives up for a little while. So when you go to a psychiatrist, you go to a psychiatrist because you can't see the ground you're standing on. You can't see the ground right under your feet. And you need somebody who's trained not to hurt you to help you see the ground under your feet, to see your invisible patterns, to point out to you, oh, this has come up before. We've talked about this before. Does this seem familiar to you? So it turns out that the brain, all mammal brains, have a predictive function. And if you have dogs or cats or horses, you'll know this. If they've had an experience, like a friend of mine used to farm with mules, and he told me that if you ever cross a mule, he'll never forget. He'll just wait till he can bite you or kick you. They just won't forget. If your dogs had a bad experience, my dogs must have had a bad experience in cars. They do not like cars. And it takes thousands of repetitions. It took me 2 years to relax one of my dogs that came from the pound, and he had big rope burns, and he was obviously not treated well. 2 years of helping him build up new predictive functions. And the predictions are there to make things efficient. If you're moving at top speed, you can't afford to surrender totally to the beauty of a butterfly and forget that you're chopping sushi with a very sharp knife. So because people often don't have an idea of what they look for, it's easy to get distracted by the gift wrapping of other cultures and other traditions. And therein lies the rub. So every spiritual practice is a result of a kind of friction between individuated human understanding of a high order and the culture, the way that people see the world. And there's a term in Buddhist practice called upaya, which means skillful means, which means I can't just come out and tell you that, this doesn't exist or this is this way. I have to tell you in a way that you can hear it. So I've seen and met lots and lots of teachers. Some were drunks, some were serial sexual abusers, some were sociopaths, some were really admirable people. And if you think that you're really deficient in something, you may put up with qualities in a teacher that you wouldn't put up with from someone else. And here's one of the problems. To the degree that you think you're deficient and not an individuated experience made by the same thing that made hummingbirds and leopards, you will give away your common sense. You'll give away your intuitions. And as we say, you'll put another head above your own. So I'm not very big on the guru tradition. I'll just come out and say this. It's a prejudice of mine. But it's not an unexamined prejudice. There's a reason why certain teaching traditions demand absolute fealty to the teacher. You do what he or she says without question. They're regarded as infallible. They're regarded as perfected. And there's something about the friction between that rigidity, that demand, and the vagaries of your personality that will actually help you see your own personality better. Actually catch the edges of the self more clearly. But there's often a very, very high price for that. There were a lot of Asian teachers that came to America and they just thought, oh, well, here's this pretty woman who wants to sleep with me. Fine, I don't see anything wrong with that. And in an absolute sense, there's nothing wrong with it. Consenting adults. But they didn't understand projection. They didn't understand status seeking. They didn't understand the romantic way in which many of their students saw them. And they misunderstood intimacy for sexuality. And the problem is that unless you're going to marry your teacher, that romance is going to be over, and the teaching may be over. And so a teacher worth his salt is going to understand, if I sleep with this person, I'm going to imperil their learning. I'm going to imperil their ability to continue. So what's more important to me? So I very much like the Zen tradition of put no head above your own. In our tradition, teachers are more like uncles and aunts who've been out along the road before you. They've been through many of the rigors of our training. And they're there to talk to you about it, and they're there to help you. And if it doesn't make sense, they're not supposed to have the authority to force you to do what they say. I've said many times that forms of sitting, forms of being, bowing, maybe even uniforms, they're there to help us. But the relationship between a student and a teacher is extremely intimate. And one of the difficulties that I've become sensitized to in Zen is that along with our reverence and respect for Japanese culture and the extraordinarily high level at which they operate, extraordinary levels of sensitivity, really, that make a lot of our culture seem like mongrel people. Along with that comes very determinative hierarchy, autocracy. I can't find the word I want. It's related to hierarchy, where the teacher has absolute authority. I had a Japanese friend who went to Japan and was studying to be a potter. And he worked for 8 years breaking the clay for his master before he was ever allowed to get to a wheel. Well, that may be the way you make the best pottery in the world. I don't know. But that's a commitment that very often doesn't work for Americans, doesn't work in our culture. You can give up 8 years like that. So I think you have a right to expect a couple of things from a teacher. I think you have a right to expect kindness, that he or she is going to see you as an absolute expression of the universe, as worthy of respect as a Zen master, as worthy of respect as a hummingbird or a dolphin or a leopard. That's the least. Now, they may be strict with you. They may insist on certain forms because they're trying to help you, because they're trying to help you resist laziness, bad habits, stuff like that. But your intuitions should be telling you, and your observation should be telling you, if these demands are selfless or not, if they're for your good. And if you get a sniff that they aren't, you should first of all talk to your teacher about it. And if your teacher is not willing to take feedback and not willing to accept how you feel and is unable to give you information that's useful to you, it's the wrong teacher. It doesn't help you or the teacher to say, oh, I must be such an idiot. He or she is obviously enlightened and I don't know anything. That's just not true. Your awareness is no different than your teacher's awareness. You may not have trained your mind to the degree he or she has. You may not have vanquished bad habits to the degree that he or she has. But your base level awareness, it's a given. It's a universal. The best teachers, in a funny way, are your friends. If your friends are also practicing, if there's a commitment that we're working on ourselves, this is what we call a sangha, which is a group of people, in this case, following the Buddha. Does it have to be the Buddha? No, but it has to be something bigger than you are. Again, there's a danger, People serve the United States in the military and very often are called upon to do things that they can't live with after that service is over because they had to put their instincts and their humanity aside to follow orders. So you have to be careful. You have to really stay checked in because it's easy to get off the mark, especially when you identify with something that's bigger than you are and everybody is saying this is the way it is. It's what makes politics so difficult. It occurred to me once, I used to live in England, and the English actually really appreciate eccentrics. It's a culture that's full of eccentric people. And they'll spend 25 minutes buying a penny candies in the store. Oh, it's lovely. Would you like the violet? No, I think I'd like the lavender. Please, let's try it. Well, take one, darling. And they go on and on. It's an island. They've learned to get along. They've learned that the nail that sticks up gets beaten down. And they have, under that pressure, they have very, very refined perceptions. It's difficult in many cases for Americans. My son's godmother came to America once, and she came to visit, and she said, my word, I was in an elevator this morning, and someone said, how are you doing? I had no idea what to answer. Different cultures, right? So, but Americans, we have our own culture. We have our own gregariousness. We have our own way of doing things. And it's good to examine it. It's good to look at it. It's good to decide what's us and what isn't. And to do that, you need a teacher. It could be a spiritual teacher. It could be a sewing teacher. It could be a cooking teacher. And what that relationship between you and the teacher is at the end of the day is intimacy. What you're really learning is the teacher's mind. You don't have to sleep with them. They don't have to necessarily be sober. They don't necessarily have to be exemplars. Trungpa was a notorious drunk. Many, many Zen teachers have been drunks. Leonard Cohen's teacher was a thief who was expelled from Japan. But that doesn't mean that they can't teach you something. But it does mean that you have to be alert. And it does mean that you have to decide where you draw the line. Because if you don't, the teacher will draw the line. And they may draw the line to their own benefit. The deepest problem is, what is it that you think you don't know or that you don't have? And I can't think of a better technology for determining that than Zazen. I spent a session once before a kind of real deepening of my practice, working on this question, what is it? I made a little mnemonic, what is it? And what is it stood for, what is it that I want to change? What is it that I'm unhappy with? What is it that I'm looking for? And I just reduced it to that fine pencil point. And I worked on that until it kind of popped for me. So there are practices in every religious tradition which help you do that, which help you either exhaust the ego so that it relaxes, or get focused enough and fine enough that you can see through it or drop below it. When you sit for a long period of time and your mind slows down on its own, your breathing slows down, you'll know when you're below your personality. And when you are, then you're in big mind. And there's nothing really you don't know. There's nothing you can't find. All the answers to everything are there. And most of the time when we are asking a teacher, we're asking before we've done that work. I don't think meditation solves everything. I think there are problems where we need therapy. You shouldn't hesitate to do that. But really, you help yourself. And the teacher is supposed to help you help yourself. And if they're not, and if you get the sniff that they're serving themselves in some way, and I have to be careful about the stories I tell, but I've seen disastrous things disguised as practice. I mean, things that resulted in suicides, things that resulted in shattered communities, things that involved ruined lives. A teacher can know a great deal about what you want to learn and still be a sociopath. And unless you can see through that, unless you can say, I'm not going to apologize for that behavior, you're in trouble. You should be with another teacher. Now what I started to say earlier was, perhaps the most important teacher is the Sangha, is a community of people that have made a common dedication to study, so that when they tell you something or when they say something to you, it's based on deep intimacy. You with them with you. You know them well enough to know, well, he may have an axe to grind. She may not have forgiven me for this. But sustained practice together allows you to go through all those little curly cues of the mind and get intimate with them. And the more you're intimate with them and the more you recognize them, the easier it is to let them go. It's like stories of your childhood. At a certain point they just get boring. Oh God, what Dad did. Yeah, he did. Okay, you're 70 now. Get over it. Time to change. That's all I'm going to say about teachers. I've got a couple minutes. Somebody asked me a question about time this morning. I got a little thing on my side pane here about an obsession with time and how you deal with time. So it's helpful, first of all, to recognize that time is a kind of human invention. Time outside of planetary motions, equinoxes and solstices, the cycles of the season. But the idea of breaking a day up into minutes and seconds and now milliseconds, that's pretty new. So one way to deal with time is to be quite formal about it. In other words, we all have, in this culture, we all have demands of time. So the more disciplined we can get about it, the more we can use time to refine the way we behave and make ourselves more efficient. That's one way of getting really free of it. I mean, I know I have to be here at 9:45, and when I get on at 9:45 and my picture is frozen, anxiety arises because I know there's people starting to tune in and there's just a frozen picture of Peter Coyote. They're not going to know, am I going to make it? Are they going to stick around? Am I blowing it? Because that's all mental popcorn. It doesn't help us. But I get up at a certain time, I sit at a certain time, and I try to keep a schedule. And as a matter of fact, I'm so bad at it that my assistant only deals with my schedule. She handles my calendar for me because it gets really busy. So Bob Dylan said, time is a jet plane, it moves too fast. Well, it moves too fast when you're doing something you like. Moves too slowly when you're in prison or when you're doing something you don't like. So the first thing you can notice is how subjective time is. When does time feel like it's racing by? When does time feel like it's slow? That will tell you something about the self that's observing and keeping track of it. In a Zen monastery, the schedule is very strict. You don't need a watch. Everything's done with bells and chimes. But it forces you to get it together. If you don't get to the zendo in time, you're going to stand out in the hall during zazen, so as not to disturb people by coming in late. So, it means you get up a little earlier, you wash, you get ready, you get prepared, you leave yourself time for a cup of tea or coffee or something. And the day moves like that. That's just the way human endeavor is. So one practice is to begin to ask yourself, why am I anxious about time? The other is to experiment with what happens when you loosen up your attention around it. I spent some time in Brazil, and I had this friend, he was so relaxed, and he would just show up when he showed up. He was afraid of kidnapping, so he would never tell you exactly when he would arrive. But he always came in this leisurely, extremely relaxed fashion. And that's the way people were. And I thought that's so different than this American Calvinistic making ourselves into little integers of factory employment. If you have a job from 9 to 5, that's a lot of time out of your day. And they expect you there at 9 and they expect you to work till 5. So if it's something we don't like, we're watching the clock. We're thinking about time all the time. Don't we live in our past experience? So we have to learn to let go of the past and live in the moment. Zazen is the practice of living in the moment, following your breath as it comes out past your nostrils. There's no more in the moment that you can be. And we only live in the past when we allow our mind to get hooked by it. Because what's the past? It's a memory. So it's a mental event. So if we haven't developed a practice of putting our attention on posture, breathing, a mudra, we're just blown around like leaves in the wind. Because when things come up that engage us, they just jerk our mind away. So Zazen is training the mind. Meditation is training the mind to stay in the present. It's like housebreaking a puppy. So it takes work. But the work is not so much diligence as constancy. Just doing it over and over and over. Your mind wanders, bring it back. Your mind wanders, bring it back. Getting angry at yourself is extra. So no, we don't live in the past. We think about the past. Everything arises. As Suzuki Roshi said, let your thoughts come and go. You don't have to invite them to tea. Here's something. So Nancy Cohen's writing, this is true especially male teachers from another culture who use confusion of power and sex. I'm just reading two comments at once. Yes, men are not the only people who use power and sex. May not be actual sleeping, but people can be seductive, people can use their charisma, people can use their attractiveness. It's something that we have to be on guard for. My friend Leslie is writing me about somebody I know. Anyway, I think that's enough for today. Everybody has things to do. Thank you for coming in. I invite you to join me in this little metta prayer I do every week. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be happy and at peace. Thank you very much.